On this edition of What's in a Game, we have a very special guest, an NBA chicken. We're going to go through Nuggets offseason, the CBA implications. We'll answer some questions from listeners and friends from NBA Twitter, and then we'll rank some of the offseason moves and come up with what we think were some of the most impactful moves. Don't go anywhere. All right, welcome to What's in a Game. This is a very special episode, as I said, because this is a new guest on the show, but a friend of ours on NBA Twitter. Many of you who are listening hopefully know him, and if you don't, go follow him on Twitter at NBA Chicken. He has great articles that I am a fan of. How are you doing, NBA Chicken? Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Thank you guys for having me on. It's kind of surreal. I've been watching your guys' content for a while, so it's fun to actually be a part of
Oh,
it this
thank
time.
you.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, we definitely connected. Like, I was loving your articles and just everything that you talk about with the Nuggets. And so you're one of my favorite accounts. And I was saying to Grace, we got to get NBA Chicken on, like, for sure. So this is awesome. How are you doing, Grace?
I'm good. I'm good. I thought this Saturday morning would be a little bit more hectic with off-season news since things are like legally allowed to be totally official, but it's been mostly pretty quiet outside of the Caleb Burton to Philadelphia news.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're
that
just
just
here
happened.
trying to figure out what's going on with this team.
Especially for Nuggets fans, this period has allowed a lot of us to talk more generally about the NBA, what we think of the CBA. I was even asking people what they thought about it if they were in other fan bases, because I know the Nuggets fans are upset. I just listened to some Bill Simmons complaining about the Celtics and the CBA and how they're going to be split up probably in a couple of years because it's so expensive. So this will be good to talk to NBA Chicken about all this and dive in because he does a ton of work on like even draft prospects, roster building. He lays all that stuff out so he can help me out and learn more about it as well as the viewers, hopefully. So, yeah, but let's get to know you more, NBA Chicken. And let's just start with your name. And how did you come up with that?
Yeah, that's a funny story. I started getting into Twitter a little more back in like 2017, and I stumbled across this meme that literally like knocked me out laughing for some reason. And that was the same day I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with the Twitter account, and I just zoomed in on the chicken's face, and I liked talking about the NBA. So that was literally the correlation with how I came up with that name, and I've been too lazy to change it for like 7 years, so it's just stuck at this point. So
Nice. Well, it's
yeah,
definitely like distinctive and easy to remember. That's for sure.
I guess so.
Yeah. So you like working with the draft and scouting the draft, and you talked a lot about the Nuggets. What drove you to kind of get into that? Have you always been into like college players and prospects in the NBA? What kind of drove you to go into that and the business side of the NBA and the Nuggets?
Yeah, I took one of those strength finder tests, and one of them was future forward thinking, and I think that's kind of applicable to how I think about sports. I got into scouting way back in like 2016, I'd say. I wasn't very vocal online or anything, but I like to just look into prospects, watch tape, and get a good understanding of what players are good at or bad at. Not just go with the consensus of what everyone's saying about certain drafts and their cycles. So I think that are super challenging and fun to think about. And so it's been something that I focus on a lot every off season. Kind of thought it'd be cool to get an understanding of players before they come in, and then years down the line, you'll actually know a lot of players in the league because you've scouted them ahead of time. And before you know it, the league is full of players you've known pretty closely if you like watch random games they've played on like a Tuesday night in like Virginia or something. So that's kind of been my thinking with all of that in the past few years.
Has there been anyone that you scouted that surprised you once they got to the NBA?
Let's see. I could do that both ways. I don't know if you remember Dragon Bender back
Mm-hmm.
in the same draft that Jamal Murray was in. I had him like in the top 5 and really thought that he could be like one of the guys out of that draft class and was an absolute bust. I'm pretty sure the average person doesn't even know who that is, but that's how quickly he got out of the league. And as far as a player that actually did way better than I expected, I'd probably say, I guess one I was really proud of was Aya DeSumo 2-3 years ago. That was a player I thought the Nuggets could have taken right when they took Bones Highland late in that draft. He's gotten to blossom and be a very solid perimeter defender, and that translated well to the next level, even though he was kind of undersized in college. Yeah, just I guess that's one. I can't really think of like a more high profile name off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's these role players these days are incredibly important because of how, like to me, it feels like parity has been more about the distribution of the top end talent in the league. And then, overall team quality is really more dependent than ever on your role players, it feels like. Before we get into talking about the Nuggets specifically, and actually related to that, when it comes to like the distribution of moves that we've seen so far in free agency, and whether it's sign and trades, outright trades, how would you describe the distribution of the movement of player like talented players in the league? Basically, like what types of teams are getting better and what types of teams are getting worse?
If you follow my writing, I love to do tiers and actually put 5 tiers together for how I kind of felt some teams were moving in this offseason. I think a lot of people consider the Sixers, Knicks, and Thunder as some of the biggest winners just because of their free agency moves or trades, with the Knicks getting Mikal Bridges. I thought it was a bit of an overpay. I think they kind of paid a tax on bringing a star from their own rival team in the city. So I think I actually have the Nets in the same tier as the Knicks as winners because they got that huge haul from Mikal Bridges, and they were able to control their own future doing those pick swaps with the Rockets. So that allowed them to be in a place where they can tank and actually have control of how bad they are and actually take that pick if it's in the top 5. So that's a great move by Sean Marks in the front office over there. And then another major winner I had was actually the Wizards because they actually have a plan in place. They actually did a great job in the draft. They didn't make a boneheaded extension like giving Bradley Beal 5 years and a no trade clause. So the bar was really low, but they passed the bar pretty well there. And then if I want to talk about some of the minor or major losers I had, we can talk about the Nuggets a little bit, but I have them kind of as a minor loser. They've lost 2 rotation players. They haven't added anyone outside of the first round draft pick. So things are still.
Who's not yet officially signed as of this recording, but we know he will be.
Right? Yeah. So yeah, technically, officially, they haven't signed anyone yet. So that's interesting. And then I actually had the Hawks as my biggest loser. They were able to trade away DeJounte Murray, but it's also admitting that this experiment for the last 2 years wasn't worth it. They overpaid for DeJounte Murray to begin with. Now they kind of recouped a little bit of that back, but then they got rid of AJ Griffin for no reason. It felt like he wasn't able to really get minutes in the rotation, and I thought he was very solid in that draft cycle. And now you're a team that's not going to be great, and you got rid of one of your better younger prospects. I thought that was bad. They're still holding on to Trae Young, which just keeps them in this revolving door of mediocrity, which is just maybe the worst place to be in the NBA. So I think they just need to pick a direction and stick with it.
Yeah, and they had like a kind of lackluster first overall pick.
Oh, don't get me started.
So they're already a loser just from that standpoint. But
yeah. Actually, did you have thoughts on how particularly the lottery of this draft class went? It was like largely described as this like bad draft. I mean, it definitely, in my opinion, was nowhere near the top end talent of last year's draft, even if you subtracted Wemby. But I thought there were some strange choices made, particularly in the lottery. You're talking about the Hawks going with Ricochet, right? Mm-hmm. And then I thought that not just the Wolves, but particularly the Wolves, because obviously 28 other teams passed on Isaiah Collier and he fell to Utah. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on some of those particular choices, given how, in my opinion, the talent field felt even more constrained than a normal draft. So you would have thought that like the top end talent would have definitely gone earlier.
Yeah, there was so much versatility and volatility with this draft class. You had players like Isaiah Collier, like you said, who was a 5-star prospect, number one in his class in high school, and then he tanks all the way down. There might have been some things off the court that we don't know about. Sometimes a couple of bad interviews or workouts end up really tanking the prospect, like Cam Whitmore last year, who was kind of a consensus top 5 guy, and he gets his stock
comp.
tanked because of a couple of bad interviews. And they talked back to the school, like apparently they went back to Villanova and the coaching staff didn't give him like a ringing recommendation, and so that kind of spreads around the rumor mill, and you have a fall. So that might have been something there. As far as this draft class, the first major question mark for me was the Hornets taking Salon at 6. I really did have him pretty high on my board. I think I had him around 14, but I wasn't really expecting him to go in the top 6 necessarily. So that was a little bit of a stretch. I also had Zach Edey like in the 20s. And so when the Grizzlies took him at 9, I wasn't surprised necessarily because he would fit a need for them, a center at least. But you're also a team that runs really fast, and Zach Edey's like one of the worst transition offensive players in terms of just like activity and things like that. So I thought that was an odd fit in some ways. So they were lucky enough to kind of be bad and get a high draft pick and ended up with Zach Edey. I thought that was kind of unfortunate in a way.
I think it was they sounded like they were trying to trade up to get Klingon, and then that fell through, and then or they decided not to. So it didn't surprise me that they took Edey, but it felt definitely like Klingon is who they were going for. But yeah, they could have traded back. But there were other instances especially in the first round, where you saw, like a player where it sounded like, from the rumor mill, a couple of teams were really interested in, and one of those few teams like could really use that kind of player, but then either they trade back or they start a little too far back in the draft, and then they lose it out on that player, to a particular team. One instance that came to mind was Kel'el Ware going to Miami, which was shocking for me because I haven't seen Miami take like an upside swing like that in a while. He's not somebody that I thought that Miami was interested in, but there were multiple teams like behind Miami that he had been mocked to, and it sounded like we're interested in him, in particular the Milwaukee Bucks. Maybe the Grizzlies were just worried about that if they were to move back.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. It was kind of a landmine, so to speak, moving back. Even if it was just like 6 spots, there was a chance Edey would have been gone by the time they did that. So it looks like a stretch right now, but it was probably the best thing they could do on draft night. I guess if I had one more draft take, it would be the Bucks taking AJ Johnson right after the Nuggets. I had him in the 40s, and
I did not know. I don't think I knew about that particular prospect at all. I don't think I'd ever seen the mock show first round. I don't read every mock or anything like that, but it's just like, oh, that's kind of surprising.
I don't think I saw any mocks. I didn't have him, and I had him in the 40s on my board. I knew he was a project, and that was one thing. And then the Bucks are a team that's in the middle of Giannis's prime, and they could have gotten someone like Ryan Dunn or Terrence Shannon Jr. that could probably play like day one. And
give them some athleticism too. They need some help on the wing for sure. They could have moved back and not taken Johnson in the first round.
I saw a ton of Bucks fans that were like, why didn't we just trade out of the draft and get 5 picks? Like I think the Kings traded with the Thunder for the 26th pick. It was 5 picks for the 26th pick.
That's right. Was it Dylan Jones? I made a joke that night that, because like you said, it was 5 second-round picks. And I'm like, I don't remember the last time the Thunder traded a first-round pick for anything.
Yeah, it seems like Presti's just moved the picks further back, and he's still somehow upgrading the roster without having to use them. So it's a little infuriating from the outside looking in, but it's great work from their front office.
Yeah.
Man, the
All
Bucks are one of
right.
those teams though where it's like we need them to be competitive in the East. And I wouldn't normally
Yeah.
root for like other contenders, so to say, but they are
Mhm.
constantly being mocked and like pitted as the losers. Like even when we had CT on, he was the same way where he thought that was the most surprising pick. And it's just like brutal to watch these East teams just fumble and the West teams just making good moves and good trades. So that's just our
Getting
life.
bigger
Yeah.
in particular. Yeah. With the Blazers getting Klingon now, it feels like every other team in the Northwest Division has like the best rim protectors in the NBA, besides Wemby, of course.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
unnecessarily stacked for sure.
so let's get into the Nuggets offseason. If the Nuggets had made a move by the time we recorded this show to add a player, we might be talking about the players that we gained, but thus far we've only lost rotation players. And the most important story of this offseason going into it for the Nuggets was KCP. He ended up declining his player option and he signed with the Orlando Magic. The question I had about KCP and what the front office was trying to do really centers around what feels like a change in the narrative, right? We start off with the end of season press conference. They're asked specifically about KCP and going to the second apron. And by all accounts, on that day, they said, we're willing to go into the second apron, all this stuff. Now, look, any team can say that, any ownership can say that, but they set the expectation that they'd be willing to go into the second apron to retain KCP. As soon as the offseason starts, or even before that, and that's like after the NBA Finals, we're getting all of this news that's like, well, KCP is expected to decline his player option and he's expected to get a lot of interest from other teams. That's not surprising, right? He's one of the best role players that would enter free agency, if not the best role player. And then the stories continue to evolve into, the Nuggets are probably going to lose KCP, all of this stuff. And I'm thinking, like, why? We have his bird rights, we could pay him. It seemed like, okay, we're going to be in the second apron probably, even if we paid KCP like the lowest that we possibly could, which is him accepting his player option, and then maybe we extend him off of that. So I don't see a reason that the number another team is offering him should matter, because we're in the same situation trying to keep him either way. Obviously, more and more stories come out, and eventually he does end up signing with the Orlando Magic. It was a $22 million $22 million a year deal for 3 years. And honestly, that number was right around what I thought the Nuggets should be willing to pay on an annual basis. I didn't think that other teams would be willing to necessarily give him as long-term a deal as we would be, with 3 years kind of being like the end of what another team in my mind would be willing to offer, and Orlando was willing to go there. But apparently the Nuggets did not match that number. So was the plan ever to actually keep KCP if they were always this worried about the second apron, as they seem to be whenever they spoke after that end of season presser?
Yeah. So my thinking is that the team they couldn't have wanted to go into the second apron this whole time, is what I'm thinking. Because, like you've pointed out, the option, if KCP wanted to do his player option, he would have opted in at around 15.5 million, and that would have basically taken the Nuggets over the second apron to begin with. So were they going to be happy if KCP took his player option? Like, that's something I'm kind of worried about now. Like, what was the plan if they were going to be in the second apron? Were they going to dump Reggie Jackson's salary anyway? Were they going to try to waive Zeke Naji or get rid of one of the second round picks from last year? There's so many questions I have regarding that. But then you also look at the Clippers, who are kind of doing the same narrative thing as well, where they were going to be in the second apron if they brought back Paul George. And so now they're trying to say, well, the second apron is such a big deal. We didn't really want to get into it. And all the reports are saying that the haggling was over the fourth year, which, I mean, it didn't matter
Doesn't
if you had a
affect your
fourth year.
status, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So you got both of these teams in the same situation where they're trying to save face. I think you can't really, I guess, from their perspective, just outright say, "Hey, we're not going to go in the second apron. We're not bringing back KCP. Sorry, guys." Like, that's just something I guess their media training isn't going to allow anyway. So
They have
maybe
media training?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like Calvin really took it seriously sometimes with some of his candor
Yeah.
in
Yeah, he
his press
skipped some
conferences.
sessions for sure.
Yeah, and you also have KCP's wife denying the reports that the Nuggets even gave an offer that was similar to the 3x66. It's very weird, and I think if the Nuggets wanted to keep him, they could have just beat out the Magic on years. They could have given him
Yeah,
4 years, 80 million,
exactly.
maybe a little less per year. Maybe even try to backload the contract so that you can maybe sneak under the second apron this year, dumping some salaries. But it seemed like that kind of creative thinking wasn't really in play for them. And now the front office kind of looks bad, and we've lost the fifth starter for nothing, essentially. So
Before we move on to other questions, I was wondering what you think, NBA Chicken, about this idea of losing KCP in favor of flexibility, because I think that's what Calvin Booth would probably point to if we got to ask him a question, like if we got him in a press conference and got to ask him about this KCP move. But we haven't seen those moves come to fruition yet, which makes it even more frustrating. And there's still a chance, but we kind of like can read what the moves are going to be anyways, whether it's Westbrook or someone or Vlatko, whoever it is. And I'm just wondering, I know it's so unknown because like on paper, this doesn't look like the most convincing roster, but do you think like the flexibility we do get, even if they're not super productive, these young players, if they're just giving our starters rest, can it get us into like a top 3 seed still?
I think in some ways the flexibility we have with the younger players will allow for more rest. I think that's going to just be a focus from the coaching staff perspective, I think, going into next season as well. It also will help having a young player that can actually play the five a little bit, along with someone maybe outside of DeAndre Jordan that can play backup center minutes during the season to give Jokic some rest. So, overall, it's also going to be the third year for Christian Brown and Peyton Watson. So that's kind of the year when they players start to kind of put it together and make a little bit more of an impact. So I'm looking for a lot more from them compared to our first round picks from last year and DeRozan Holmes. But I don't necessarily like banking or putting all our eggs in that basket of internal development. I'd love to see some other signing that's a veteran
Yeah.
presence that we can depend on a little more consistently.
I think that a lot of fans contemplated the idea of KCP leaving. Like maybe some, like I could have totally seen like Philadelphia trying to make like a 2-year 60 million, 2-year 70 million, like just overpay because they can, and then just to snatch him away, and then it's just like that's just not feasible for us. After that offseason presser, everything after that in terms of the reports and then any official media appearances were about, it seemed like about like prepping everybody for the possibility of him leaving. Okay, so I'm like, okay, they've been preparing for this, but now we're 6 days into free agency and well into the off season, right? But it seems like it feels like there wasn't a solid plan in place, plan B, plan C, etc. Or I don't even know if I should call it a plan B, if it looks like the plan was never really to keep KCP in the first place. And I always said, like, the front office can make their jobs a lot easier this summer if they just keep KCP, because the fact that we lost him makes trying to answer the questions about this roster a lot more difficult, because we still have the same needs that we had before we knew we were going to lose KCP: ball handling, backup center. And now we have another question mark, potentially at the wing, although I think we have maybe not too many wings now, but like the right number of wings now that we've lost KCP. But a question about just a veteran presence on this roster, right? We are I believe middle of the pack in the league in terms of average age at the moment anyway. And we still have 4 roster spots to fill. A lot of players have gone off of the free agent market. The cost of losing KCP in particular, you're losing a veteran piece, you're losing potentially a floor spacer who you could have used in certain lineups to help maximize the offensive skills that our young players do have. You're losing a potential tradable contract for a rotation level player. And instead, we're left sort of waiting for like the scraps of free agency. I think that the narrative about the second apron reducing your flexibility is somewhat overstated relative to the position that you're in if you lose a player like KCP.
I have to ask though, coming off that point, how are you feeling about Calvin Booth right now? Where are you kind of at with either concern level or just like how are you feeling in general?
I know one of my favorite podcasts, the group chat, always does the DEF CON. I think we're not at like DEF CON 5. I think that's the worst one. I think somewhere in the middle right now. Now, if free agency was over and this is all we had done, we'd be way more alarmed, I think. So I think, first of all, he has won a championship. That first year, he kind of threaded the needle getting CB, KCP, and Bruce Brown. I think the last draft and last offseason was where I really just kind of disconnected with him. I really liked the Strother pick, but the Pickett and Tyson picks were like I had just driven for like 7 hours and I was watching the draft right as I got there. And I almost lost my mind seeing Pickett and Tyson because they were so low on my board. And I had
Ooh.
Colby Jones, Leonard Miller, and a couple other guys ahead of them who have been able to kind of blossom in their first years, even though they were in much smaller roles. But they also did more than Pickett and Tyson because,
Which was play at all.
yeah, they actually played a little bit. And then on top of that, he gave them the guaranteed contracts right away, which I know there was this whole idea of trying to make sure you had manageable salaries because the second apron was coming next year, but it was a little too soon, I thought, with two players that I really didn't anticipate getting much better because they were two of the oldest players in that entire draft cycle. So that was one mistake. And then the Zeke extension, doing that a year early, really has cost them now. That poison pill all of last year, just not being able to trade him. The Nuggets were just able to trade him without the poison pill provision 4 days ago. That's just how long they've been with this albatross of a contract with Zeke's extension. So all of that to say, that was really bad last year, but he's made a very good selection in the draft this year, and now it's about threading the needle again. Will he get maybe Gary Trent Jr. on the tax mid-level, still get Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric on the minimum? That's kind of the one great pathway that remains. It seems very unlikely, but that's one of the reasons I'm not completely out on Calvin yet, because all three of those moves are still in the cards.
Yeah, it was interesting because he was kind of on record saying that if we won last season, it would be like we stole one because he didn't expect to win year after year after year. He was like, we're going to get a couple out of like, a 5-year window or something, or maybe a few. Last year, he didn't seem like that confident that it could happen, but he still knew we'd be in contention. It seems like less likely that we'll be in contention just because of like how we look right now. But do you think he looks at it like this year's the go time because my draft picks are going to pop and we're going to compete? Or is this another like, we got to take another year and the year after that is when we're going to really get the gears going?
Yeah, at least from how he originally spoke, this coming season should be one of those go for it years. This is your second year of these second round picks, Tyson and Pickett, that were your guys that should be blossoming into rotation players at this point. So I think from the timeline of how he's expecting things to go, this year should have been one of those go for it years. And it's not really shaping up that way right now. And I'm not too sure, outside of these free agent moves and trades that are still in the works, I don't know how much better the team can get at this point.
Yeah, he's kind of confident in his guys, and it's just a matter of if he's going to be right on them or not and how ready they are. Are we moving to Reggie now and how low
Yeah.
his value was? Because that was insane.
You mentioned Reggie. That was actually the first domino to fall because that was our first move of the offseason, was dumping Reggie Jackson's salary on the Charlotte Hornets along with 3 second-round picks. A lot of people have tried to speculate about what this move was for, clearing minutes for Jalen Pickett as the backup ball handler potentially, because Malone didn't really play him last year. But honestly, since ruminating on it last Thursday, I really still don't have a good read on the timing of that move, because you can do a salary dump whenever, especially if you're willing to give up 3 second round picks to do it with a $5 million expiring salary, right? What are your theories about the timing of the Reggie Jackson salary dump?
27th, we make that trade on the second day of the draft. The next day, KCP declines his player option, and then 2 days later, he signs with the Magic. And so there's about a 48-hour window in there where the Nuggets had an additional 5.2 million that they could potentially add to what they could offer KCP, and the salary dump just helped them get a little lower before under the second apron. With that additional money actually being gone, they could have given KCP a 4-year, $80 million contract where they backload the contract so that there's about 16 million on the first year. And that would have been like maybe a couple 100,000 under the second apron. And we would have been able to keep KCP and stay under the second apron because we had cut, or basically cut, Reggie Jackson's 5.2 million off the salary. So that was my thinking in that time frame. There may have been a potential offer they gave, but like I said, they would have had to backload it that first year if they were just so desperate to try to stay under the second apron for one more year. But it sounds like that's just my thinking. That 48-hour time frame where they might have been negotiating with KCP, they had that extra 5 million to work with. He also didn't have to worry about state income tax in Florida. So there's all kinds of little minutia things that we don't think about in contract negotiations. So that might have been a last-ditch attempt to get KCP back on the roster, and it just didn't work out.
But my question about that is, again, like the salary dump of Reggie to try to get under the second apron could have been done at any point, because you can go over the second apron and then later dump Reggie's salary to get under it if there's a particular thing you want to do under the second apron, right? So that's why the timing still didn't make sense to me. You could say, oh, they were trying to create some kind of cap on what they could offer KCP. It doesn't make sense to be that desperate to make that kind of move if it's just for show. And by that desperate, I mean including 3 second round picks on a salary dump of a $5 million expiring contract.
Yeah. Before I lambast that trade, I think the one aspect about that in terms of the timing is that the team wouldn't have had access to the tax mid-level of like 5.2 million as free agency started. Right. So they would have only been limited to minimum contracts. And I don't know if there was another target. They were maybe trying to thread the needle, keep KCP, stay under the second apron, right as free agency starts. And they signed someone like D'Anthony Melton, who I thought would be in our tax bracket, but apparently he got like almost 12 million from the Warriors.
Yeah.
But you have guys like Gary Trent Jr.
This
right
was
now.
bad for the middle class of the NBA, but I'm seeing a lot of great contracts for role players over the past week.
Definitely. A lot of centers have gotten paid. A lot of people I thought were going to get, almost all of them just got paid double of what I expected, essentially. I don't think any of them are mad about that.
But I'd been thinking about that too. Like, how is this going to affect every class of player? Like the minimum guys, the role player guys, the stars. Where is this going to shift? Teams are having to really pay for those marginal pieces that is going to fulfill a need. And I'm sure they're like, we don't really want to pay this for this specific player in an ideal world, but because we need this, we got to do it, which is good for those players, right? But for other teams like the Nuggets and top-heavy teams, you're getting priced out. How much work did you do, NBA Chicken, on like potential Reggie Jackson trades, like trying to like use his salary for something? Did you do that a lot?
Yeah, I had actually put a drafted article together where I'd created some budget tiers. Essentially, if we combine Zeke and Reggie's salary, we'd be at around 14, 15-ish million. And these are the players we can trade for, like Dorian Finney-Smith, Jordan Clarkson, Grant Williams, Cole Anthony, Steven Adams, Wendell Carter, Terrence Mann, Gabe Vincent. That kind of class of player was in that price range. And that's why I thought you attach those two bad salaries, so to speak, with their 2031 first, maybe lottery, top 10, unprotected, potentially, to get a player that caliber. That was kind of the tier I was most interested in, because those look like players that could be either a fifth starter or a six man that could come in and make a difference. But now our budget's way less with just Zeke's 8.8 million. There are players like Ayu Dosunmu, Kenrich Williams, Javon Carter, Davion Mitchell. The list isn't great. Georges Niang, I don't know if he is still with the Sixers or not, but that's just kind of the tier down we've gone with our options on the trade market.
That's a good question, Will, because there's a choice made there when with your theory of they were trying to maybe potentially offer KCP more money while staying under the second apron and get access to the taxpayer mid-level, but the choice is having access to that taxpayer mid-level versus if you can figure out a way to use Reggie's salary as part of like an aggregated salary involving trade, especially if you think there's a high likelihood of KCP leaving and you're going to be under the second apron, in which case you can make that kind of move. So it's almost like that salary dump in the universe that you're describing, where it was to create some room to potentially be able to pay KCP. The Reggie salary dump feels like it didn't take into account KCP leaving, because you would have wanted to have that salary to put together with like a Zeke and another one of the second round picks or something to try to trade for another player. We're going to talk about the main restrictions of the second apron and why it is, if not like you may not agree with it, but it's understandable that a team would want to avoid those restrictions. But the main one that I was like, this is actually going to be an important blow for how the Nuggets build their roster, is the inability to aggregate multiple contracts and trades. But dumping that salary effectively foreclosed on every option to get somebody that was a sort of sixth starter caliber player on the trading market anyway.
And it makes me think if Calvin checked on Reggie's market during last season in the regular season. Because now there's stories coming out, and it's speculation. This isn't official reporting, but that Calvin might have been frustrated that Reggie was getting so much playing time rather over like Pickett or other draft picks or something. And I'm sure Malone was thinking, I got to do this because he's a vet point guard. And we've talked about the Malone and Calvin philosophies and how they might differ. And I'm like, maybe Calvin was just like trying to get rid of Reggie last season. He should have done it when his stock was higher and he was actually playing well if he was just going to dump him in the offseason. It's definitely the biggest kind of blemish on Calvin's offseason right now because it's so bizarre and we haven't done anything.
Well, there's also nothing else. It's just blemish. Like, you don't have anything else.
Exactly. Besides this Holmes draft, which we're going to talk about.
Okay, let's actually talk about the one shining bright star of the offseason for the Nuggets so far was that we got Holmes. And, we had to trade 3 second round picks to move up for him. But we talked about, situations where teams were maybe too far back, didn't get the picks that they wanted. And it had been widely reported that this was the Nuggets' top target, that there was some kind of promise in place, all of that stuff. Everyone's going to deny everything publicly. But how do you feel about getting DeRozan as our use of the first round pick?
Yeah, back to that media training stuff. I don't know how that got leaked so widely. It was so widespread. I thought it was fake at one point. Like in my draft guide, I was like, "There's too much noise around this. This is not very typical for it to be this well broadcast." But I guess it was the truth in the end. I think I gave the trade up to get him like an A- because I thought it was just one too many second round picks. We did get to keep the 2025 second, which I was mostly happy about at the time. So I thought that was fine. And then as far as how the board fell, that was about as well as most fans could ask for. DeRozan falling into the 20s was something I wasn't sure was going to happen. I thought he was maybe a more ready player than Khalil Ware, who went at 17. So once Khalil was off the board, I thought, okay, there's a chance for him to fall a little bit here. And getting in front of the Bucks was very important because he was pretty much the guy they were going to be taking at that pick. So at the end of the day, you can't be too mad about the trade because they got the guy that they wanted, brought him in, and it's going to be exciting. I think there are some misconceptions about Holmes as a player, I think, but I think it's going to be really exciting to have him on the team.
Yeah, really quick, what's your read on like him playing the 4 versus the 5?
That is something I've been more vocal about him playing the 4 than the 5, just because some of the weaknesses in his game are, well, it's really just his frame. If you look at him, he's really thin. It's kind of hard to build on your frame at certain points and stages. He's a bit of an older prospect, so it's not very likely he's going to have like an AD or Giannis bulk up in the next 2-3 years. So at the NBA level, he's kind of physically ready to guard 4s. He has some of that lateral quickness to defend on the perimeter a little better than most, but I think he's going to be solid as a small ball 5 in the right matchups, being able to defend another small ball 5 or a really small lineup. He can be very active around the rim as a rim deterrent and can make plays on the perimeter as well. So I think overall he's more of a small ball 5 to me than a true 5, and that's kind of the reason why I've wanted another center in this free agency period.
So you talked about that as being the major misconception about DeRozan as a player. Are there any other areas of his game that should give fans pause about how he'll be able to contribute immediately on the floor?
Yeah, one of those adjustments a lot of players in his position will have to get used to is his usage rate dropping. In college, they posted him up a lot, kind of an ISO low post work. He's not going to have 10 to 12 seconds to get into his groove and get his shot on a regular basis in the NBA. He's going to have to adapt and be ready for a smaller role. And that smaller role is going to include knocking down outside shots. And you've seen the progression throughout his college career with his outside shooting, but in some regards, some scouts still kind of are iffy on if it's a consistent thing. And I can kind of see where they're coming from with that. The percentage is pretty solid, but the actual amount he's taking isn't that much. So in a smaller role off the bench, he might get 2 to 3 threes a game. And is he going to hit 1 or 2 of those a night? That's kind of what it boils down to for his new role at the NBA level. And turnovers were also a big deal in college. He was a pretty solid live ball passer, but some of his decision making wasn't that great. You'd kind of see some scenarios where he'd get off his feet and then he'd have to make a decision. He's kind of athletic, so he got away with it a little bit in college, but at the NBA level, in his smaller role, he'll probably just be a connective passer more than a heavy on-ball playmaker, so to speak. Those are some of the things I think he'll have to work on. And I think the coaching staff's going to help him with that, and the sets he's a part of and things like that will limit those kinds of mistakes.
And what do you think is the one skill that he'll be able to consistently contribute on a nightly basis, like right away?
Yeah, I think the athleticism in terms of just being a play finisher, a lob threat, we have seen what that looks like with DeAndre Jordan a little bit, but having someone that can do the pick and roll, a pick and pop with whoever the backup center is, or even in some lineups with Jokic, I think it's going to be interesting having him be a vertical threat that we really don't have on the roster outside of Aaron Gordon, who's actually in the rotation a lot. So it'd be nice to continue to have that vertical spacing when Aaron Gordon's brought off the floor. Some of that threat is still going to be on the floor.
Was he your key draft pick that you kind of wanted the Nuggets to draft too, or did you have someone else that you were like hoping they would get?
In my tiers, I had Devin Carter, and Jared McCain as like the Black Swan event. Like somehow one of them tanks in value. It would have been nice to have a really solid backup point guard. I think both of them would have instantly beat out Jalen Pickett and then potentially Reggie Jackson, just with those skills they bring in day one. And then Isaiah Collier was actually the second player on my board behind Holmes on my list or mini board I had before the draft. So Holmes and Collier was kind of like my 1-2, and we got the number one guy. So that was really solid.
we need these young dudes to become contributors and fast. And it's like on paper, it's easy to be skeptical of it because how quickly does that kind of happen in this league? But we kind of saw it with Christian Brown, so it's not totally out of the question. So it's like we're going. It's easy to argue both sides. Are you like more on the optimistic side for the bench kind of developing and letting us have a good season next season? Or are you more skeptical of the realistic chances that these people can make a leap?
I'm a little more skeptical. I'm a pretty pessimistic person in general,
Okay.
so I guess that just kind of translates over. When you think about our playoff rotation, it's typically 7 to 8 players at the most. The Nuggets have 4 guys right now that we know
Oh
we can
no.
trust. We have Christian Brown, who I know a lot of people think he can slot right into the KCP role, but there's just this aspect of the playoffs that I think are going to be really hard for him. There's going to be plenty of games where where KCP, I guess, was the guy that was out there spacing the floor, and teams are going to fly out to KCP. They're like, oh my gosh, no, 40% shoot, we got to lock that down. But I think teams are going to be able to pack the paint a little more and just let KCP, I keep saying KCP, CB, Christian Brown, they're going to be like, we're going to let Christian Brown beat us. We'll double yoke in the paint. We're going to sag off Aaron Gordon. We're going to sag off of Christian Brown. And good luck. You better hope
Mhm.
those guys make the threes, is what I'm thinking. And then the other 3 guys off the bench right now, I guess it would be DeRozan, Holmes, potentially would be Pickett and Watson. Like we would need another ball handler, I would think, in the playoffs, even if it's for 10-minute, 8-minute spells. And right now it would be Pickett, I guess. And then Watson, I think, is going to be very important next season. Can he take a bit of an offensive leap? We already know what he can do defensively, but what kind of things can he develop? Can he become a more consistent knockdown shooter from the outside? And then I don't really know who our backup center would be. In our championship
Neither.
run, we had Jeff Green come off the bench, like that could kind of play small ball 5. But yeah, that's where I'm kind of bleak about things right now. But we do have an incomplete grade with our offseason because
Yeah.
hopefully more moves are on the way.
Yeah. My thing with that is just like I very much believe in every first round pick that Booth has made thus far. Like they've all shown themselves to at least be regular season rotation players in the NBA. Like that's a hit, right? When you draft somebody late in the first round and they turn into like a player that you can play every night, that's awesome. But we need them to turn into playoff players. And in particular, we have these very defensively oriented wings, and then we have Julian and Jalen Pickett, right? The issue that I have with the roster so far, besides it just being incomplete, but even looking at last year, is that we didn't have the same level of sort of veteran scaffold that these other young guys could play off of. This is one of the reasons I've wanted a backup center, a real backup center for that bench, even if we didn't get a backup ball handler. My thoughts have changed as the offseason has gone on. Just having somebody out there who knows how to do like the basic basketball things consistently on a possession by possession basis, in particular a center, someone who can screen, someone who can rebound, someone who can like run pick and roll, right? That has like several years in the NBA and is going to be just like at least solid every night, that will allow the young guys to continue to grow in their impact roles without having to, worry about having to consistently raise their floor, because that's what it means to be a playoff player, especially under Malone, right? Is to be a low mistake, high floor player like Christian was really his first year. But Christian got to do that as like the 8th man in the rotation. Now he's going to be the 5th man, and I'm not sure that he's ready for providing that level of impact on this team. I think he'll be fine playing with the starters really for the most part. But yeah, I just feel like the roster is really lacking in guys that can help Peyton and Christian just continue to grow in their, like, particularly their offensive games. And it just puts a lot of pressure on them, more than I think really should be applied for second and third year players on a championship contending team. I don't think that this is like the best scenario for them to be trying to develop under. I don't know how like freely they're going to be able to play when they're worried about making mistakes all the time, because there's no one on the floor that can sort of be that floor raiser, particularly when Jokic is off, right? Because he's like the greatest floor raiser in the history of the NBA. Well, speaking of our guys, there was a report the same day as the Reggie salary dump that Jamal was expected to be signing a 4-year max extension with the Nuggets. I actually want to just review the wording of this report a little bit. And then on June 27th, Shams went on whatever his FanDuel platform is, and talked about how the sides have been negotiating that there will be a deal once the moratorium lifts, which is today on July 6th. Also, depending on Olympic play for Team Canada. So that's weird and vague. After he announced that the deal was forthcoming, he also said that Jamal was one of the best clutch players in the league. We don't have it as of the recording of this show. So I'm like, what's going on here? Who was this report? Which side was this report from? And it seemed like from the Shams report that actually the information feels to me like it came from both sides. But then you get at the end of it, this Jamal is the best clutch player, was one of the best clutch players in the league. It feels very like agent speak. So I'm like, okay, maybe it is the sides have been negotiating and like Shams is getting this information from both of them. And yet it's July 6th. We have no announcement as of around noon Pacific of an extension for Jamal.
I think part of the reason it's not too big a deal, in my opinion, is because he's going to be signing a 4-year max. So no matter what happens, there might even be a player option on that 4th year, because I think Jamal will hit 10 years of service. And so he could get out of that player option and then sign an extra max in case he does get an All-NBA or something like that. So but I really just expect them to make the signing. Tim Conley's style was to give these contracts a little early and make it a max. If you look at Jokic, Jamal, and MPJ in the past. So I think it's kind of within the culture of the front office to just go ahead and get these done. So I'm not too worried about it. I don't think Jamal is necessarily like trying to go explore free agency next year or something like that. I think both sides will come to an agreement. And he's with Team Canada right now, so I don't know how busy he is and trying to get all those things worked out, the final dotting of I's and crossing the T's. So maybe that might be part of it.
Grace, do you have any like conspiracy theories about this? Or are you feeling good?
It's just another bullet point of uncertainty about this offseason. The fact that the report was put out there, it seems like from the parties involved, made me think, okay, it's coming sooner than I thought. So now that we're on July 6th, I'm just like, okay, well, you reported this a week ago. Is it coming soon? Or like, what is holding it up? Whereas I wouldn't have even been thinking about it except as something that I expected to happen at some point this summer if that report hadn't happened. So it just feels like, for me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of other fans, every additional bullet point is like another thing that we're not giving the benefit of the doubt on, because they haven't given us a reason so far this offseason to give them the benefit of the doubt with respect to what the plan is, because it feels like there isn't one, especially as other teams are like loading up around them and seem to have a plan. I think it was Ryan Blackburn who said as of it was either yesterday or Tuesday, 2 days ago, we were one of 2 teams that had not signed a new player. Let's get into our NBA offseason CBA mailbag. We have a lot of questions about how the new collective bargaining agreement actually works. What are the restrictions of these different aprons? And, why is it that, teams have been so weird this offseason, right? Because, the Nuggets have been extremely quiet, but they're not the only team that hasn't made a lot of major moves. So our first question comes from Poissonian Distribution, and they ask, what are the penalties of being in the second apron? How onerous are they really when you look at them in the context of roster building? And actually, we have a graphic from Bobby Marks at ESPN, and he has the rules of the apron up here. There are two aprons, the first apron and the second apron. And we talked about one of the major restrictions of the second apron in particular. I think it's the most onerous one. That is the inability to aggregate contracts in a trade. So if you wanted to get a more expensive player, you can't put two or more contracts together to match their salary number and make that trade if you are over the second apron. But NBA Chicken, would you like to expound upon the most important, in your opinion, the most important restrictions of the second apron?
Yeah, I think the one that most teams are most fearful of is the moving back of future picks. So if you finish the season above the second apron, that means that pick that's 7 years out would be frozen. So for an example, the Suns next year are going to be over the second apron. Their 2032 first will be frozen. It can't be traded. So when they get to the next trade deadline, and that would have been the only first round pick they could technically trade because of the stepping rule, it's now completely untradeable as well. So it's one less asset to have in the clip, or as so to speak, whenever you're trying to make one of those bigger trades at the deadline. You're just going to be stuck with one less valuable asset that you could offer to get a player that can really upgrade the roster. If you're a repeat offender, it's basically over a 5-year span. If you're over the second apron 3 times, that pick, on top of being frozen, is moved to the end of the draft. So let's say 7 years from now, KD's gone, Booker's gone, Beal's gone, and the Suns were over the second apron this whole 3 of those 5 years. That 2032 pick is going to come up. They could be the worst team in the league, win 8 games, and they'll pick with the 32nd pick, most likely after the expansion or whatever. So they'd have the last pick in the draft in 2032, even if they were the worst team in the league. And this compounds. So if they were over the apron again over another 5-year stretch, that 2033 pick could be put to the end of the first round. And so not only are you crippling the ability to add to the team at the trade deadline during these seasons of contention, but you also are going to cripple yourself when you are actually bad, potentially down the line. With those picks you couldn't trade, you're also going to be picking at the end of the first round. So that's one of the major implications a lot of teams are worried about.
I think it's a fair point that you make. One of the things that I sort of downplayed when I was looking at the frozen pick situation was, well, it's two-pronged, like you say, right? Your pick is frozen, so you can't trade it. But then also, 7 years into the future, but then also they'll get moved to the back of the first round. I was thinking more about that second part, like, but if you're a team that's going to be good, then you should just not worry about those picks getting frozen. But they are so far into the future, or not frozen, but moved to the back, because you're going to have bad picks anyway if you're a good team. But it's so far into the future, you could be in rebuild mode and then you have nothing, you're not able to do anything at that point. I guess my counter to that being such an onerous restriction, if I was talking to these owners and I wanted to get them to spend money, I would just say, if you go into rebuild mode, you're selling off all your stars anyway, and you're going to get a bunch of other picks. So I wouldn't worry about your own picks so much. The inability to trade the picks that are far out because they're frozen and not being able, you can't use them in transactions, is actually a pretty serious concern when it comes to being able to upgrade roster spots, because you often have to use draft capital to upgrade those positions. It's so draconian. I found out about another one of the second apron restrictions the other day, which was that, so I was thinking about the fact that, okay, you can't aggregate contracts together to get a higher end player if you're already such an expensive team. That kind of makes sense, right? But one of the other restrictions that's there is if one of your players, let's say we were a second apron team and we decided to, what if we gave KCP a short deal, right? And then it was like let's say it was a 1-year deal. We go into next summer, we're definitely a second apron team anyway because of Jamal's extension. But then we decide to deal KCP in a sign and trade. So another team wants to sign him and trade for him. we basically can't take back contracts in that trade because you can generate a trade exception if you're a second apron team, but you can't use them unless you get under the second apron. That's actually bad for like that player too, because they basically have the option of going to a cap space team or getting an extension from the team that they're on, and it reduces their market because they can't go anywhere where the only option that team has is a sign and trade. It's just like, it is incredibly onerous, I will say. Like, as much as I advocated for the Nuggets just blowing past the second apron to keep KCP because I believe in this team and I think they should be going all in right now, the fact of the restrictions is very real in terms of flexibility. But I was thinking more in terms of the alternative, because the Nuggets are not a team that generally is like making midseason moves or making big changes in an off season anyway. So we're in the situation right now that I thought we would be if we lost KCP, which is like we have all this flexibility, but we're not really like doing anything with it. My question is actually whether it even makes sense for a team that is, as good as the Nuggets are, to just kind of like just barely duck the second apron. Then we get access to the taxpayer mid-level, but we got worse because we lost a player. And the taxpayer mid-level is basically the only like good thing that we gained in all of this. Is it worth it to just barely duck the second apron? Or would you want to do something like what Golden State did this year, where they just said, we're trying to duck the luxury tax. We're getting way under, and then we're going to get access to the full mid-level exception. We're going to be able to participate in sign-in trades, like getting real impactful flexibility. Does it make sense to try to like tinker around the margins and make yourself worse for a little bit of flexibility? Or is the real only option to stick with your team, blow past it, let's say like Boston Celtics style, or recognize you're not close like Golden State did and be like, we're not going to be paying X hundreds of millions of dollars in luxury tax next year, and then we're going to be able to reshape our roster like they have?
Yeah, my initial thoughts when the second apron came out was that there's really only 5 teams that should even consider being in the second apron, and those are the teams that have the 5 best guys in the league. You should be able to move around the margins if you already have your top 5 in place, even a 6-man in place. There's not really a move at the deadline necessarily that's going to be this dramatic improvement if you had access to that future first round pick. So in the case of the Nuggets, I had assumed way like last year that we would be a second apron team because we can just keep KCP. We're going to be a second apron team next year anyway when we give Jamal and AG their extensions. So is it just a matter of trying to be under the second apron early, just so we can be in the second apron an extra year later? I wasn't too sure what the strategy would be, but it ended up being that we wanted to stay under. So in my opinion, it should just be something that you accept if you have a generational talent in their prime, that you just go into the second apron, you kind of figure it out from there. And you're really not figuring out a lot because it's your job to really understand and how to navigate those waters. So it shouldn't be just this shock of like, oh my gosh, we're a second apron team now. The team has already invested in those rookie scale contracts. When I'm talking about the Nuggets now, you're basically only getting the flexibility of having a tax MLE and free agency. And we've already seen that that's not worth a ton to sign a rotation level player. So my thinking the entire process was that we would be a second apron team. We just kind of navigate those waters and see if we needed to duck it another year. But that's not the approach we've taken. So
yeah. GMs have a very nice built-in excuse to not do certain things. It'll be fun going forward with this if this stays the same, deciphering what the motivations were for moves of all GMs across the league. Let's go to the next question, though, which is from Mile High Woofer. It says, in a CBA context, I'd be curious to hear a discussion about the other contenders and what they look like going forward. So they mentioned the Celtics, and OKC as two teams that have advantages in this, who seem like they have advantages in this context, but differing windows of opportunity. Obviously, the Celtics are defending champions. They look like they have their core locked up, at least for this year, a majority of them locked up for a while. And OKC is the new young hot team who are adding pieces this offseason right now. So how would you start with this question, NBA Chicken?
So the Celtics obviously just won their championship and were basically already a second apron team going into this offseason. And you weren't going to not pay Jason Tatum his max contract, super max contract. So that was a given. And one of the things that I'm thinking that I was just bringing up when you're one of those teams is being in the second apron. If you're going to just go for it, just go for it. So they're not really afraid of the second apron right now. They have their top six, and so they're just going deeper into it. They're keeping Drew, they're keeping Derek White. They'll probably have Al Horford for the rest of his career, and Porzingis and Brown just signed his extension last year, and Tatum this year. So they're just in the second apron, and they're just going to be comfortable there for at least 2 to 3 more years. And kind of like what Grace was saying, oh, so what if our pick 7 years from now is going to be at the end of the draft? We're trying to win like a three-peat right now. So they're going to have a couple of issues maybe at the trade deadline next year or the year after. They'll be wondering, why can't we sign someone like just off the bargain bin with a first-round pick or a few second-round picks? And it's just because they won't have the assets to do it. But the bet is that they have the core already in-house and they can continue to compete with that core players. And then as far as the Thunder, like Grace said, they're on a different timeline. They're 2 years away from giving the extensions to Jalen Williams and Chet. So that's why they're able to afford someone like Isaiah Hartenstein and overpay someone like Hartenstein because they have the flexibility.
I love Hartenstein, but that was a way overpay.
Yeah. And it could be a player
second highest, or I guess third. Okay, wait. There's AD, Yoke, there's Kristaps, and Embiid.
Embiid.
Now Hartenstein is the 5th highest paid center in the NBA.
Potentially.
Wow.
Yeah. And he might not even start for them some nights because they have Caruso, Dort, Ja, Williams, and Chet. So he's going to be a player that's going to be played almost north of 30 million and won't start all 82 games if he's healthy, which is just crazy to think about. But to kind of answer their question, their second apron scare is going to be 2 years from now when they have to potentially give, if Jalen Williams and Chet hit an all-NBA team, a max deal, and they'd be just like the Nuggets, 3 max contracts, a ton of younger players. And they have another crop of young players that are going to be up for contracts. Kassan Wallace, they just gave Isaiah Joe and Wiggins their extensions. So they're going to be one of those teams that are pushing the second apron before you know it. So if anything, they're just trying to take advantage of the fact that all of these guys are on rookie scale contracts while they can before they end up in a situation just like the Nuggets in a couple seasons.
Yeah, it seems like it's actually pretty tough if you end up being a team that drafts and develops really well, because you could end up in a situation like OKC, or will be in a few years, or where the Nuggets were, where you have 3 max contracts on your roster. Different kinds of max contracts for sure. Because MPJ and Jamal is currently on his rookie scale max and will be on the veteran max in a while, with Jokic on the super max.
Just piggyback off that point for a second. I don't know if you guys heard Bill Simmons' rant about this, but he really summarized my thoughts on the fact that a team like the Suns, who are going to be in the second apron, who essentially have put this team together from drafting one guy and just getting everyone else from other places. Then you have teams like the Thunder, the Nuggets, who drafted their main core and are still going to be penalized as if they built their team like the Suns did. And it's really shocking that there wasn't any provision in the new CBA for homegrown players, even if the provision was like the player must have played for the team 5+ years, or the player was drafted by the team and you get like a 10% salary relief or something. Like, imagine
Right.
if the Nuggets could get $3 million in compensation, I guess, against the tax for Jokic, like 2 million for Murray, and like a few million for MPJ. And then you have like just a small little pocket of money that maybe gets you under the second apron, or it could potentially get you under the first apron. You never know, just depending on what kind of incentive there would have been to build teams internally. But we can thank CJ McCollum and the NBA Players Association for this
Yeah, no,
lack
I
of foresight.
completely agree with you. I completely agree with you on that. When I was first going through the CBA last summer, my first thought was like, okay, like if you really want to encourage like homegrown talent and all of that, there must be some kind of exception in there. It's similar to like what you're proposing is similar to what they do with veteran minimum contracts, right? A lot of people were up in arms about DeAndre Jordan's announced veteran minimum being, I think it was 3.6 million, but the cap hit is only 2 million because the league basically not, I don't think they subsidize it. I think they like it's like a cap hit thing where it
Mhm.
doesn't count as much toward the cap as the actual amount of cash that they're getting paid, so that veterans that have played X many years don't get completely pushed out of the league by rookie scale minimums and other kinds of minimums, basically, right? So it's just like the US tax code, it's a statement of priorities, right? You can write in whatever you want, and they could have, and they didn't. I don't know how much thought actually went into this by the Players Association besides getting a salary floor, but um actually, like related to that, we get a question from Mile High Pete that asks, do you think these rules will cost mid and late career vets money long term? I thought it was interesting when CP3 signed with the Spurs for $11 million. They made sure to tell us it was low enough that he could sign with any team if bought out. Doesn't seem player friendly. Now, the note that I will put on this is that we didn't talk about this specific restriction in of the aprons, but I believe if you are a first or second apron team, you are not allowed to buy out a player that makes more than the mid-level exception. So CB3 is going to be making less than the mid-level exception, and I think that is what Pete is referring to. So at the deadline, if a team wanted to buy him out, it expands the market of teams that would be allowed to do so.
Yeah, I think as long as the player makes less than the full mid-level exception, then any team can sign him. Yeah, that's the wording, I think.
So the question is like, do the new rules cost these mid and late career vets money? Because you see like CP3 potentially like took a smaller deal than maybe the Spurs were even willing to offer him, just because he wanted to be able to have that flexibility to be bought out by somebody else at the deadline.
Yeah, I think that's a great example for one. And then you can also look at DeMar DeRozan's market right now. There are
Mm-hmm.
plenty of teams that might have been able to sign him, but they also would have probably gone into the second apron, or because they're already in the second apron. I mean, look at the Lakers. They aren't going to be able to even give him a tax MLE because they're in the second apron. And even if they weren't, the most he could have signed for was like 5 million. And so it'll be very interesting in future free agent markets where these older veteran players go, because outside of maybe ring chasing for a minimum like the Warriors got to do with a couple of players, some teams are going to only be able to offer that. And a contender might not want to spend the tax MLE on DeMar DeRozan, as we've seen. Seems like a few teams are passing on that opportunity right now, and you could say DeRozan's value is maybe around 15 million this coming season, and it doesn't seem like he'll be getting anywhere close to that at this time.
So actually, on the other side of that, we got a question from Ed Holinsky, who asks, in your opinion, has this crazy NBA salary money gotten out of hand? And is it starting to cause a disconnect between the league and its Joe Blow average NBA fans? Will, what do you think about that question? I know we had a conversation on the Four Corners podcast the other day about the NBA like having like a marketing issue, and maybe like part of that is this disconnect between players and fans. But what do you think about just like the overall rises in salaries causing a disconnect.
I don't know if like the top tier players making like 50 million is gonna cause a disconnect for an average fan. I mean, I guess I don't know if they're thinking of a fan who is just really annoyed that elite athletes get paid like this ridiculous amount of money. But I
But
definitely
fans
see
always
it.
felt like that,
Yeah,
like no matter how much
yeah,
they're
but it's
making,
like
'cause it's going to be
it,
more
it
than.
but I feel like most fans are kind of used to that and they accept it because we like to watch the sport. But if they're referring to it as just it affecting the CBA and what teams can do to keep them together, because it does suck, like we were just saying, if teams draft well and you're being penalized for it. And the league used to say they wanted star players to stay on their teams that drafted them because they want the fan base to be able to like connect with them and feel like, they're not just losing out because they're a small market and these stars are going to LA or wherever. It kind of almost happened like that without the CBA because I feel like every team has at least like one pretty good star player, maybe not like superstar, but the talent's pretty well distributed. This is a lot of rules to be putting in at one time with the CBA and a lot of limitations that even like GMs I don't know how they feel about it. I don't know if they feel like they totally understand it and they're comfortable with their strategy, whether that's to completely avoid it or to think about how to navigate around it. I know the average fan's not going to want to learn all this CBA stuff. And, even like kids, like my nephew, like when we lost KCP and I'm like, yeah, KCP left for the Magic. He has no idea why. It's very confusing. Even we don't necessarily know why, but it's hard to explain like money like that to average fans. And I do like player movement. I think it's fun. I think it's fun to like see new combinations of players play together. Obviously, it can get out of hand, like with the Warriors and such, but it really sucks right now as Nuggets fans to basically being penalized for being good and drafting so well. So,
Yeah, my thing is that it's bad unless it helps my team.
yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
I agree with you that I don't know about it like a disconnect between like the average person and the athletes. I think that disconnect is just there ever since maybe like the 2000s because it's an entertainment business and that's just how it goes in every entertainment business. The highest paid people have a disconnect between them and their fans because average people just don't make that kind of money. But you could even say like in contrast to, something like even like acting, like in the NBA anyway, a veteran minimum is now in the range of 2 to over $3 million a year. But it's not that I want like veteran minimum guys to make less money just so that they can be closer to the average Joe. Like they put their bodies through a lot. They have to travel a ton. They have so much uncertainty in their careers. This is just kind of the nature of this job. I think that like superstars, I don't know that there's going to be as much player movement at the top end, but I think we're going to see a lot more player movement from role players. Maybe that's just my experience from the last 2 years watching Bruce go, Jeff go, and
Mhm.
KCP, because I think the franchises, for the most part, like we have the counterexample in the Clippers letting Paul George walk, but I think the franchises, for the most part, are going to try to do whatever they have to keep their top end talent. They're going to give them their maxes. Even the Clippers were supposedly willing to offer Paul George the max for a year less than he wanted, right? We haven't seen anybody actually take a discount. I know like LeBron like alluded to perhaps being willing to take a discount for the Lakers if they'd been able to like get a real like player, but until we see a superstar take a discount, I actually think that what's going to happen is we're going to see more movement from the middle and bottom class of the NBA and less at the top, just because like you said the talent distribution is at the top end wider in the NBA now. So teams are going to do whatever they can to keep their guy. I just don't know that there's going to be as much benefit, especially if it's hard to keep a super team like, supposed super team like the Phoenix Suns. Does Kevin Durant like ask for that same move if he understands the kind of restrictions that the team's going to be under by virtue of having him? Does Beal go there if he understands the kinds of restrictions the team's going to have by virtue of having him? I don't know. I think that like 2 or 1.5 really off seasons in, it's just not enough time to really be able to fully assess what kinds of medium and long-term implications the CBA is going to have with how teams are actually going to operate. Because you saw last summer, I don't think it was nearly as hesitant last summer as it was this one. And I know there are some new triggers that kicked in this year, but most of the rules went into effect last summer, and we are already seeing like a huge shift in behavior from front offices just 1 year in. And so I think that everyone's still trying to like figure out what it is that they're going to evolve into as a front office in order to operate under the new CBA. Do you have any thoughts on that, NPA Chicken?
What I had kind of written down was how the economic scale differences between the NBA and average Joe is just going to get bigger. We already have this new TV rights deal coming up pretty soon. It's just going to make like a Supermax 5 years from now worth like $500 million probably. So it's just going to get worse in that regard. But overall, I'm kind of with Will. We're going to probably get a little more role player movement, which should make for some interesting dynamics in the coming seasons.
Yeah, last thing I want to say, is there any scenario where, because we've been talking about parity a lot and how dynasties are going to be harder to maintain, where like the Celtics, for example, could win like 4 out of 5 years because they do have this pretty good alignment of players that are falling into their roster. And I know they're going to be in the second apron. It's going to be super expensive and punitive. But like the rest of the league also is under these restrictions. It's going to be hard to build rosters to compete with those types of teams. And I know it's the Celtics and whatever, we can debate that. I could see a dynasty being maintained because teams can't just like trade for a star that's just going to change their team completely, like, the Cavs were able to do when they were trying to compete with the Warriors and stuff like that.
I guess I would just like what I would say to that is that I don't think trading for a star was going to make the kind of impact even before this new CBA, because that has less to do with like the CBA's impact on parity and more to do with the current distribution of top end talent in the league and that impact on parity, because that's where I see the parity is at the top, right? Obviously top 5 guys are only on 5 teams, but you have maybe like 15 arguably top 10 guys in the league now. And I don't know that it's ever been as widely talented as it is. So adding a star to your team is not necessarily going to help you like compete with the Boston Celtics, because they have Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and then all these pieces that fit around them. But I can also see this situation that you're describing where they win 4 out of 5, because what happens, like you could just be locked into a team by virtue of the restrictions of the second apron, but that team could just be good enough to compete forever long. I think it has to do with like, where are the stars in their prime? How is injury histories with everybody? Is everybody just like really consistent? It's hard to be that for 5 years in the NBA, right? Even like the KD Warriors dealt with issues. I don't know that the Celtics are quite on that level just in terms of talent as a team. So I think it's just all the same luck that you would have had to have before to be able to rip off like 4 out of 5. Maybe the new CBA makes that more difficult, not because teams can't sign a new star, but because it's just harder to get better.
The only thing I'd add to that is we might see some teams do what the Sixers did this past year, completely aligning all of their free agents to be free agents at the same time, creating all of this salary cap room. You can bring in some guys that you had on the roster previously. You can sign Paul George, things like that. It doesn't always work out where you have the salary room to sign a star and the star wants to go there. But
right. And I don't think Paul George wanted to go to Philly. I'm maintaining that. I think that he just decided to not blink in the stare down that he had with the Clippers. So
yeah, it's definitely going to take some luck, and it's going to be, I think, a viable strategy for some GMs just to have the free agent cap space room and try to improve that way. Because if you don't have one of the top 5 guys, that might be your avenue for getting one. So we'll see how teams approach it.
All right, so the last question from Beastin25_8. Why didn't the new CBA make the East stop being awful? Man, you could take this in so many ways.
Yeah,
Go ahead and start, NBA Chicken.
it's very interesting because the East is so top heavy. They have the Celtics, Bucks, Knicks, and Sixers, and then there's this middle tier now with the Pacers and the Magic. But then most of the teams after that, I guess I should include the Heat there too. But most teams after that, like the Hawks, the Pistons, the other teams down there aren't really first of all, they're not well run. Most of them are still I don't think any of their GMs have been there longer than like 3 years. So no cohesive plan has been in place. There hasn't been the best drafting. I mean, you look at the Bulls, they've had great opportunities, but have missed on a lot of picks. They've traded away Laurie Markkinen. Like they went all in and were good for like 6 months, and then they haven't been good for like 3 years. So you have these teams that are just in this revolving door of mediocrity, or they've just been in the basement of the NBA for many years, like the Pistons. And the CBA isn't really going to help them get any better because of these restrictions. I mean, you do have teams like the Magic that were smart enough to have cap space and get a guy like KCP, but this is just because they finally have some smart guys in the front office and have a direction that they know they're trying to go in. And so when you think of it that way, there's 7 teams that know what direction they're going in and 8 that haven't really defined that well. And then you look at the West and it's like 11 teams that have defined and know where they're going. And then maybe 4 that don't have any clue what they're doing. I'd say maybe the only team that doesn't know what they're doing is maybe the Trailblazers, because even the Spurs and the Jazz, I mean, their front offices have made some solid moves in the past. They just haven't had the talent to really progress really well. So that's just kind of how I see the dynamics between the East and the West.
Yeah, you laid it out perfectly. I mean, if the CBA makes it so that the top teams have trouble maintaining, the bottom teams still have to make smart decisions to get themselves out. Yeah, and it's just the East has more bad teams towards the bottom than the West. Yeah, Grace, we love the East is not as good as the West agenda. I mean, it's just a fact, not an agenda. What do you think about the East, and will they ever get better?
Now it's a widely accepted fact. I've been on this agenda since last year. I think that the East has a lot of these like you say, these like middle teams where their top end talent, not just like their one star, but like say their top 3 guys, don't necessarily fit as well as the middle tier of the West, to where you can say like I see this team being competitive in a playoff series, unless they're, in the Eastern Conference. Like you saw the Pacers, they also got like a lot of injury luck, but they were able to make the conference finals with like one of the worst defenses in the league because it's not as competitive out there. But then you have a team like you have the Cavs and the Magic. I think that really those teams in particular, you could even like compare them to say the Pelicans and the Grizzlies, where they're a lot more defensively oriented. You're not quite sure like where to rank their top guy. And then the second star is a question. The Magic are incredibly young, so I almost want to leave them out of this conversation because I had no idea how good they were going to be last season, particularly defensively. Offensively, they're probably the most challenged of any of the teams I listed. But I do think that the West tends to, like their teams tend to have the highest of the top end talent. I've been on this whole kick about how the West has drafted almost every dynamic guard in the league. And you can look at the ones that are in the East, like Jalen Brunson, like Donovan Mitchell, and say, nope, those came from the West as well. You could give the East Kyrie because, I mean, he was the number 1 pick, and who else is Cleveland going to pick in that draft? But then the Hawks got Trey, but Luka was an option. So then you're like, okay. And then they have Tyrese Maxey. Yeah, they traded back. I just think that they make really interesting choices with their drafts. I think that it's interesting that the East doesn't seem to like value size as much outside of really Embiid and Philly. You could say the Bucks value size, but I think the Brook fit is more about like we need a 3-point shooter next to Giannis, and Brook was the best like stretch five that they could get at that time. So I think it's just interesting how they approach their roster building, not just around their stars, but with their like how they draft their stars in the first place. But yeah, the CBA is not going to fix the East. The East needs Jesus at this point.
You just need to
Okay.
get rid of the conferences. Just
Yeah, they
Yeah, there
really
you
do.
go.
They really do.
Then we'll be good.
yeah.
Okay, let's move on to our final segment, ranking the best off-season moves for cost and fit. So the way that I wanted to do this was we would make a ranking of 5 moves in this off-season, and I thought we could start with you, NBA Chicken. You could give us basically go down your list of your favorite moves and give us the first one. And if either Will or I think that we have like a one that is better, and we can try to like convince you to like put that up in the rankings, and then we'll just kind of go down the list like that.
Yeah. So my number one offseason move, which is definitely not either of y'all's, is the Nets getting the access to their own picks and getting that haul from Mikal Bridges. Like we've been saying about the East and how a lot of these teams are just not picking a direction and don't know where to go. I think the Nets were finally able to do what I thought they should have done like when they were at that trade deadline and traded Kevin Durant away and got Mikal Bridges. I didn't think they were going to get any kind of offer close to this for Bridges after having him on the roster for 2 more years and him kind of losing his luster. I wasn't expecting him to be, I don't know, getting 5 picks for him was incredible. And then also
it was crazy is what it was.
Yeah. And then getting access to their own first round picks again. It's going to be, I don't know, when you actually have a direction you're trying to go and you actually do it in the East, it's actually just commendable in my opinion. And so the Nets they have 3 picks going into this loaded 2025 draft in the first round, which is incredible. That can help kickstart the rebuild. They're still somewhat a desirable destination. So if those picks kind of kick into gear, they can just restart and be a great team, kind of like how the Magic were just at the bottom rung of the East, got Paolo, drafted Suggs and Franz, and were able to start competing very quickly. I think the Nets have set themselves up to be at least maybe in the conversation for the playoffs in the 27-28 timeframe. And I don't know. I really am a proponent for teams tearing it down and actually starting over, and they actually did that. So I got to commend them for it.
So
yeah.
My counter to that, I actually really like that move, and I hadn't thought of that as one of the best moves until you mentioned it earlier. But my one counter that I think might be a little bit better is for a contending team. I think Philly being able to get Andre Drummond for 2 years, $10 million, basically offering a little bit less than the taxpayer MLE to get a real backup center and start to solve those non-Embiid minutes that have plagued them both in the regular season and the playoffs the last however many years is a pretty big deal that I don't think is necessarily appreciated as much this offseason. You had other centers move in particular, like Hartenstein to OKC, that kind of thing. But no team, I think, needed a backup center besides the Nuggets more than Philly.
No, that's a good point. We always talk about how Embiid is having some type of nagging injury. He's going to be out for 2 weeks. They're going to have to deal with him maybe not being healthy going into the playoffs. And this is an investment in him being able to take more time off and still be able to win games when he's out and, spell the minutes that he's out when he does play. So I see what you're saying with that. So they should be a team shooting for 50 so wins, and hopefully Embiid because of Drummond, has the rest that he needs to go into a playoff run and actually compete at a high level. So that's a great choice, I think.
I think that's probably the biggest one. I at first was like, usually I'm okay with trades if teams get like the player that they want and it like fits for their roster, like kind of no matter the cost. But these days it's like you really got to be careful with what you're giving up because resources are getting tighter. So I changed my mind on that deal where I was like, it definitely was a huge overpay, and Sean Marks did a really good job. So
your favorite GM, Leon Rose, actually overpaid for something
yeah,
in Mikal Bridges,
but I would
in your
rather
opinion.
overpay than like lose someone and overpay to lose somebody, i.e. Reggie. Yeah.
So was Mikal Bridges your number one offseason move, Will?
It was definitely up there. I couldn't decide between that and like maybe. I mean, Paul George was the biggest free agent out there, and so the Sixers signed him. So it's like, it's hard to argue, but I'm still not convinced that that makes them like that good. I still almost like the Knicks just adding Bridges than I do the Sixers adding Paul George.
Yeah, for
That's
me,
fair.
like the Sixers were already like a really, really good team. It's not like they were a team that struggled offensively when everybody was healthy. So I don't know that Paul George actually increases their ceiling all that much. And it's really just about like, is everyone going to be healthy in the playoffs and all that. So
Right.
that move didn't really make my ranking at all.
What do we got for number 2? Are we
I had
keeping this
Andre
one?
Drummond too,
Andre
unless
Drummond.
you have an argument for
Whoa.
something better.
Well, Andre Drummond was already on the Sixers, which is why I'm a little lower.
Oh, well, yeah, but like
Oh, yeah.
And
they
that
addressed a specific need now.
I'm not as sold on Andre Drummond, but
Okay.
I feel like Hartenstein to OKC is bigger than Drummond going to the Sixers.
Yeah, I think I had that second on my list, actually. The Hardenstein move.
It's a tough one.
Would you like to say why, Will?
I just think Hartenstein, he's a way better player.
Is he gonna offer the same impact to OKC that Drummond could give to Philly in terms of filling that specific need? That's my question. Is like,
I think he
what
will.
does Hartenstein do for OKC?
I think just Hartenstein's just overall, just what he gives, because he can rebound and do things offensively. It may not be like the most ideal fit with OKC at the center position, and he may be overpaid a little bit, but he was like heavily sought after. And I just think Andre Drummond, like even I wasn't that excited about him as a potential Nuggets bench player. I'm pretty low on him. I don't think he has much left. I think he can rebound, and that's pretty much it. But I know that that's a need. I don't know. It's tough. I just feel like the overall talent of Hartenstein's just better, even if it's not like looking for one specific skill that the Sixers are trying to fill, if that makes sense.
Okay. I just disagree in terms of the impact value for what they paid, but I think that Hartenstein's not going to add as much as they're paying for him, but for that team, they can obviously afford it, so it doesn't matter.
I guess it's like, the
so
cost versus what you get.
That goes into the fit criteria.
Yeah,
so that's fine
tough.
if you want to put Hartenstein there. But I think that the Drummond signing makes more impact per dollar.
Yeah. I want you to be right, because I don't want Hartenstein to be good on the Thunder at all. Okay, we're putting Hartenstein, and we're putting we've talked about them enough. Are we good with 3 for Drummond?
Yeah, that's fine, unless you want to argue something else is better than my number 1.
I'm fine with it being 3rd. I may have not even put that in my top 5, so I like your thinking on this. It's out of what I was thinking. So
in terms of like the impact, fit, and cost, like it's a high impact, it's a great fit, and it came at a low cost. So I can definitely see where Grace is coming from with that.
I mean, that's what teams want these days.
You guys, you can disagree with me.
It's what teams want these days.
I'll just be salty about it.
And you didn't even put Paul George on your top 5, Grace?
Because it was about impact, fit, and cost. I don't think that Paul George adds what they needed, and he's really expensive, and it's for 4 years. So he didn't make my top 5 now.
Okay.
It wasn't just about like the biggest splashy moves is the thing, because that would have been easy. I could have just listed the biggest contracts of free agency.
You could, and it would be fair. I like that you're going with this. This is why, like, you remind me of Moneyball. You know what I mean? That's why I was like posting the Moneyball clip of you the other day.
You better post that meme in video. Actually, that reminds me, because the way that I was thinking about this had to do with what, in my opinion, was the most impactful move 2 off seasons ago in terms of impact for the dollar, was the Nuggets getting Bruce Brown for the taxpayer MLE,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was the best value move of that offseason in terms of getting you to a championship, in my opinion.
That's
right?
true.
So that's the way that I was thinking about it.
If I were to throw another idea in there,
Please.
the Mavericks moving off of Tim Hardaway Jr. and
Yeah, that was on my
somehow
list.
getting Quentin Grimes back, I was like, wow. Because we didn't get to lambast that Reggie Jackson trade much, but this was what I was going to compare it to because Tim Hardaway made more. They traded the same amount of second-round picks, but they also got a rotation player back. And I thought that was one of those margin moves that is, like you were saying, kind of similar to how the Nuggets got Bruce Brown, just on the margins, just a random depth piece that ends up making an impact. And Quentin Grimes was at the top of my trade deadline article as a target I wanted the Nuggets to get. And so the fact that the Mavericks got off of a ton of salary and got him back for a free upgrade, I thought that was actually pretty solid. I think I had that third on my list for fit, impact, and cost offseason moves.
Yeah, I really like that one. I am totally for that one being on this list for sure. Unless you have something better, Bill.
No. I like that move so much better than the Mavs getting Clay, who I'm still low on, and I can't wait to see that play out in the exact way that I think.
He's probably just going to take the Tim Hardaway Jr. role, for being honest. Like, they needed at least a regular season scorer to just take on that, like, off-ball, whatever role, and then we'll see if he can play in the playoffs.
You know, one move where I think I kind of forgotten about was the Thunder getting Caruso for Josh
I was
Giddey.
literally just about to mention that. Exactly. Yeah. That one has to be there.
Nothing. Yeah, they paid nothing for him. It's an instant upgrade.
For a known playoff, like, he's going to be a playoff rotation player, you know, as long as he's healthy. God, they're going to be so good defensively, and they already were. I don't know that they're going to get like that much better because there's only so many turnovers that a team can force, and they were already first in the league in that anyway. But it's just like just such a clear upgrade for no cause.
No, I mean, that was going to be one that I would definitely put. I wasn't sure where to rank it, but
I don't think they needed a Caruso is the thing. It doesn't hurt to have one more playable wing. And
man,
they got to move Giddey without paying a draft pick. So
I might put it second. The more I've thought about it, ahead of the Hartenstein.
Is it moving up?
OKC's on here twice. Yeah.
I think that was. I don't know. I think I put both of those deals on the same level, but I'd also move Hartenstein down. So.
Whoa. So okay, we agree that Caruso is above Grimes going to the Mavs.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Is it above Drummond?
I don't think so, personally.
I think it is, just because of the cost, just because they've replaced Josh Giddey, who's not a rotation player in the playoffs, with one of the best role players in the league. It was just a 1-for-1 trade. I just could not believe it. The more I'm thinking about it live right now, I'm like, maybe that should be number 2 or number 1. I don't know. I kind of forgot about it.
Yeah.
It was so.
You know what? A week or so ago. I am a gracious hostess, so I'm going to let you put Caruso for Giddey on number 2, and then we will let the people decide on Twitter.
Yeah.
By a poll, what they agree with, what they don't, what other moves they would add. But I think this is a really interesting list.
My nerdy 5th pick was the Wizards draft, kind of similar to me having the Nets number 1. They actually nailed a draft. They got Sar, Bub Carrington, who I had as a pretty high pick, and they got him at a really solid spot at 14. Then they traded up for 14, I believe, with the Warriors, and then they traded up 2 spots to get Keyshawn George, I believe, at 24. And that's just a solid little core to add to Bilal Coulibaly. Of course, Jordan Poole is the tank commander, but they now have some pretty solid pieces around Jordan Poole, if you want to call him the center of the young core there. But they're heading in the right direction. Front office got their first draft and nailed it, I think. So that's a solid thing.
You've had a lot of praise for the Wizards today. I just had to get your thoughts on Troy Weaver coming over from the Pistons, immediately extending both of their centers, drafting Sar, and then signing Valanciunas.
Yeah, that's a lot of centers.
Everybody has a type.
Yeah, I guess in the modern NBA, Jokic and guys like Embiid have pushed teams to get more centers, even though maybe all of them don't have that versatility. It's a start for the Wizards. I mean, getting rid of Beal was the first domino, and now they've slowly started doing the right thing. I thought they could have kept Denny Avia, but they got a lot for him in that. I think it was the
I don't
night
know
before
what
the draft.
Portland is doing right now.
Oh my God. That's why I had Portland as like the worst run team in the West. Cause man, that was I kept rereading that trade. Like, how many picks were involved for Denny Avdia? Like, wow. It was a great job by the Wizards. And now they even have Tyus Jones that they can throw into a sign and trade with a contender or something. So seems like they're going down the right path, which you couldn't really say about them for the past half decade.
God, yeah, it's one of the worst. So you got to feel good for the Wizards fans. They've been through it. So some hope for them. That will conclude this episode of What's in a Game. We did get to 200 subs, though. We got about 200 subs, which is awesome. So thanks for everyone who subscribed. We hope you continue to subscribe. Next episode is a special one, so look out for that. We're having renowned media member from the Denver Nuggets themselves, Matt Brooks, on, and so that will be fun. And
you gonna check that episode out?
Yes,
Absolutely.
Everyone check that out. Before we go though, NBA Chicken, is there anything you want to say or just plug? Or obviously everyone follow his Twitter, and I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, I have nothing really to shout out. Now that the off season slowly slowing down, I might actually get off Twitter for once in a little bit. But I might have a little article write up summarizing the Nuggets off season, and then probably just take a chill pill for a little while. So yeah, and I'm basically just on Twitter. I do have a YouTube channel, but I haven't posted to it in years. So yeah.
Well, cool. If you decide to, we'll definitely would love to see that. I really enjoy your writing and your articles. It's always very well written and detailed and laid out, and I love the tiers that you do. So it was really fun having you on the episode. Really appreciate it. Massive fan. And yeah, just remember everybody to like, subscribe, share this episode, follow us on Twitter, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you're listening. We really appreciate it. And remember, winning is fun and losing sucks.